That means that they were entrusted with the money of the Muslims, the well-being, the situation, the food, the housing, the military and borders, and everything in between to run an entire nation. That's what we pretty much were talking about the last few Khulafa series, with the first Khalifa being Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, then Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, right? And then we have now we had Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, now we have Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. So in this segment today, inshallah, we will actually look at Uthman radiallahu anhu, who he was as a person, and we're going to actually try to take some time to reflect on some of the greatest things he did through both action and statements. And what I want to do is actually, even as we go on through the session, I'll stop and pause and reflect on who he was on different parts of his life. So both before Islam, during Islam, during the rule of the Prophet Muhammad himself, and then as well as afterwards, a little bit into after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, even actually before that, his life in Medina, and then after the death of the Prophet, and then to the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu himself, when he was actually the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khalifa of the Muslims. And finally, we're gonna, the very end, unfortunately, we have to end off on a note where it may not be as pleasant, but at the same time, we can understand that it's also a great point of learning, even when we discuss the fitna that led to the murder and assassination of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Even there, we would actually see and learn quite a bit. And so even though we have to end off by talking about that piece, about Uthman radiallahu anhu's death and how he was assassinated during a time where there was much fitna and much chaos and trials within the Muslim Ummah, we're going to actually recap and see that there's definitely many lessons we took away from his life. So Allah took him in a way that was he was inshallah most pleased with, and as he did actually die as a shaheed. So with that, once again, Bismillah ar-Rahim, here is Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. So his name, first of all, is Uthman ibn Affan ibn Abi al-As ibn Umayyah ibn Abd Shams ibn Abd Man ibn Qusay ibn Kilab. Okay, so that is that's how the Arabs used to have their names and their lineage all attached to their names. It's a matter of genealogy, and it was the way the Arab society worked in 7th century Arabia was they were really big on noting down the family and the entire genealogy of a person, and that gave lots of reputation. It gave lots of class to certain individuals, because the tribe you came from and the clan under the tribe you came from mattered a lot. It gave you status in society. That's what separated the lower class and upper class in society. The Arabs lived in a time where tribal life was the code of life. There was no law except the law of tribal life. And what a tribe really was, and just to give you guys a little bit of a background, and we'll understand why this name and this genealogy of Uthman ibn Affan, what tribe he came from, is so important. For the Arabs, because they really took pride in their ancestors, their previous generation, and their fathers and forefathers. It was very important for them to ask each other, who was your father? So they would always have Ibn, Arbi something, or, they would always attach the father and the forefather. And, the most affluent tribes, the ones that were either some of the founding fathers of the Arabian Peninsula themselves, like Hashim, for example, and those that came from the tribe or family of Hashim, for example, the Prophet Muhammad would get, again, lots of high status and lots of high affluence and influential effect on society. Okay, so Uthman ibn Affan, he actually goes all the way back to one of the the greatest big forefathers, Qusay ibn Kilab, he traces all the way up to there, but he actually also even um, his lineage intersects um, with others, like for example, Abd Shams and other really affluent tribe members, leaders of tribes in the Arabian Peninsula that actually founded and made Mecca the hub that it was. So Mecca was the capital city, okay, and that's where all the trade and merchants and caravans and would take place. The Arabs really founded themselves, and they were what they were. They were the great nation they were, even though they were not obviously the strongest, most powerful nation at the time. They were sandwiched between the great Persian and Roman empires. They were kings of their own world. The Quraysh in particular were the dominant kings of the entire Arab peninsula and the Arab world. Because of two things, right? One was the fact that they were given the Kaaba. The Kaaba was passed down all the way from Ibrahim salam to his son Ismail salam as they built the Kaaba, down to eventually, after long historic rules and different tribes and people kind of rotating and taking over the region, eventually fell to the Quraysh. The Quraysh were the most dominant and most powerful tribe and political leadership of the peninsula, and they were the heads, the political authority. They ran the businesses and the markets and then the entire trade caravans and merchants, and every year there would be pilgrims would come in with their bringing their idols, and they also come to worship the idols in the Kaaba. And the Quraysh were the guardians and the custodians of the idols. So in this land, it would not be uncommon to see sometimes tribes just get into war, and warfare was common, especially before Islam, before the Prophet came in. That period was known as Jahiliyyah, because that's where you had complete lawlessness, no guidance from Allah, no rule by Islam. And in that situation, there's sometimes wars went for 30, 40 years long. Lots of people died. There was lots of vengeance killing, and there was back and forth. Again, lots of just fighting and warfare, and there was statements the Arabs had, like sometimes we would, they said that if we didn't fight an enemy tribe, we would go pick on a friendly tribe and would fight with them. And in the desert, it was a harsh environment, right? Because you had it was as every family for themselves. A tribe is just a large family. If you can imagine, you have you as an individual, you're one individual, you have your father, your mother, your siblings, and your relatives, and that's like your close family. And then if you keep extending out to your cousins and your uncles and your aunts, anyone who's remotely related to, and forms one big tribe. And that tribe is named after either the fathers, the forefathers, the founding fathers of the tribe, dating back a couple of generations before. So, for example, you might have Bani Hashim again. You can have Bani Makhzum, right? And these are all names of tribes. They were actually clans. And under the more, again, king of the tribes, the king of the peninsula was Quraysh, Bani Quraysh. Now, it's very important to note that the Quraysh were so revered, and they had such command over them, that even in this lawless place, in this place where there's, there was no rule, and it was every tribe for themselves. And it's kind of like a gang mentality in the desert. It's very important to note that the one tribe that nobody ever dared to have an effect or have any to oppose was the Quraysh. So you would see sometimes during the summer and winters, the Quraysh would send out two caravans, one during the winter, one during the summer. And during that time, if another tribe, sometimes they lived off highway robbery, they would see one of the caravans being transported, and they would just go and raid and take all the resources, because they have their own mouths to feed and they have their own families to take care of. They have to also equip the soldiers with the weapons and what they needed to keep fueling them, keeping their military strong. Again, because that's how That's how it was. You had to have a strong military for a tribe to not go extinct. But the one tribe they would never, or the one caravan they would never ever oppose was the Quraysh. They would see it and they would understand, they would see the mark of the Quraysh, they would see it's going to the holy city of Mecca, the most elite city and the hub of all the peninsula, and they wouldn't touch the Quraysh's caravan. And now comes down to the point where we're now talking about the people of coming from these families, from these tribes, and from the Quraysh themselves. They were obviously highest and upper class in society. They were the ones very highly respected. They were the ones that were extremely rich. Some of them owned slaves, and it was said that some of them they owned slaves in hundreds in number. Even some of the more, even if you're not in the most powerful of the clans of the Quraysh, if you were kind of under the branches of the Quraysh clan, sometimes you owned like 300 to 400 servants and slaves, and really whatever you wanted, men and women at your feet, and food and clothing, and coming from the most richest places at the time. Something that was very, very revered at the time was Yemeni clothing, shoes that came from Yemen, or particular spices that came from Basra or Syria. You had access to that. You had owned that. You were quite literally the rich kings and queens of the peninsula. That's what it meant to be from Quraysh. And now we come to Uthman ibn Affan, because how does he fit into this entire this entire context of the peninsula, and into how the families were structured. Uthman ibn Affan was not an ordinary individual. Okay, he was upper class. He was elite. He was loved by not just any clan or any tribe. He was revered and loved by the Quraysh. The Quraysh used to really respect him because of his ability to be very articulate and well-spoken. He was a lover of poetry, and that back then also, what gave you superiority was your intellect through your ability of command over the Arabic language. So the most superior in society were also the poets and linguists, and the ones that had a mastery over Arabic poetry, the rhetoric and the styles, and just in general, for example, memorizing the greatest poems at the time, which were called the Mu'allaqat. And Uthman ibn Affan was a lover of poetry, and he was able to impress a lot of people, and he was actually pretty upper class. He was said to have been born in Mecca 6 years after the year of the elephant, which is 6 years after the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this was, some historians say either exactly 576 AD or 579 AD. So at this time, he was obviously, people dated things according to the year of the elephant, because that was the big event of the time, and he was someone in this period. He was known to be very skilled and very, very, again, affluent, because of the fact that his father was not just an ordinary individual in Mecca. He was also a really wealthy merchant. So again, in Mecca, the hub of the peninsula, where again the trades and spices and goods and merchants and products and people came from all over the peninsula every year to do trade in, you were upper class if you were a wealthy merchant. If you were really up there, elite in society, if you had a command, if you had a successful business, if you had really great entrepreneurial and people skills. And that was his father, Affan. Uthman ibn Affan had a father who was a really wealthy merchant. Now, what would actually happen is that his father died early on in his life, while he was very young, on a trip to Damascus. And this forced Uthman to inherit the family business. Okay, he had to take on the challenge of now, at a very young age, taking full ownership, to not just maintain the business that his father had built, but to maybe even take it to greater heights. And that was his challenge. And these are the type of challenges, if you are ever put down on something like this, like you were really young and one of your parents passed away and you were given your entire family business, which was your life, your financial source, the source that keeps your family running, and that's your main financial resource. Then it really hardens you and grows you to new heights which you never could imagine. So not only Uthman radiallahu anhu was given this, and he had a few brothers, but he took the ownership of actually taking that business and maintaining it and then taking it to new heights. So actually, not only did Uthman radiallahu anhu, he was already he was the type that in society he wasn't the one that engaged in some of the ills at the time. So at that time, the Arabs were heavy gamblers, drinkers. They they would also cheat and steal, and they would charge heavy riba interest on loans and all of that. And they committed lots of zina, again, lots of fahisha. And Uthman radiallahu anhu wasn't one of them. He was kind of similar to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the sense that he would stay away from all of that. And it was said that one time Uthman radiallahu anhu, he used to say that even during his Jahiliyyah, before he became Muslim, during this period, he said that he talked about alcohol. He said that alcohol destroys reason, and reason is the most precious, honorable gift or thing that Allah has given to man, and the human being should elevate himself by means of reason and not to destroy it. And he would actually speak against heavy drinkers, and he would oppose alcohol and again fahisha. He said he actually had a quote, and he said that he never used his right hand to commit any fahisha or engaged in zina or any of that. So he grew up a very, very clean, young, good-hearted young man who was ready, well-equipped, mature enough to take ownership of his father's business after his father passed away. So again, that gave him that maturity. That gave him the ability to make not just maintaining that business possible, but he took it to new heights. He made advancements financially. He made it strong, and it was said that he increased the profits. He was able to take it to another level, and which was a huge thing, which was a huge deal. To be able to inherit your father's business, your parents' business, and take it to a new heights in the peninsula is a big deal again in the peninsula, because this is what your livelihood is. So that was Uthman at a young age, being able to be from again an upper class, good character, modest and high esteemed family, to the point where the Quraysh loved him. He had the skills of an entrepreneur, and he was wealthy, extremely wealthy, because of this success of his business. The Quraysh loved him to the point where, like, if you actually looked around, if you looked at, let's say, some of the mothers talking to their children, some of the mothers used to say to their children when they used to express love to their child, they would say that, "I love you," like the way the Quraysh love Uthman, which is a big deal. That shows you his name got around. It was in this entire peninsula, so many people and so many different types of again, merchants and farmers and cultivators and businessmen and women and different types of people. You could be an upper class or lower class citizen in society. You could be a slave. You could be an orphan in society. Among all these people knew Uthman. They knew Uthman ibn Affan. They loved him. And again, it was a big statement to say that when a mother said to her child, "I love you like the way Quraysh love Uthman." Again, high praise and great things about him. So I'm going to give you a little bit of his life at a glance, and then again we'll come back to his time with after Jahiliyyah. Okay, so his life at a glance is something like this. They called him, and especially later on in his life, Dhun Nurayn, and that was primarily probably because of the fact that he married two daughters of the Prophet himself, and that's a huge honor. If you even marry one of the daughters of the Prophet, if you're somehow related anyway to the Prophet, it's obviously a huge, huge deal. But he married not just one, but two, and they called him the one with the two lights, the one with two daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. And it wasn't at the same time. It was first Ruqayya radiallahu anha, and after she passed away, then he married Kulthum radiallahu anha. And they were these. What's significant was these two daughters were both divorcees of the sons of Abu Lahab. So some time back, when the Prophet Muhammad gained his prophethood, there was backlash by the Quraysh to not change that political authority and leadership, and they wanted to humiliate the Prophet in any way possible. And there was lots of action taken by the Quraysh, from the persecution to the boycott and many things. And one of the things that Abu Lahab did to humiliate the Prophet was he had his sons divorce the daughters of the Prophet. His sons were married to the daughters of the Prophet, and he made them divorce them. And these two divorcees would eventually later on marry Uthman radiallahu anhu. So that's Ruqayya radiallahu anha and Kulthum. Another reason why people used to say alternatively why they called him Dhun Nurayn is because of the fact that he would recite Quran in the long hours of the night, and he would recite deep into the night. And so for that reason, they would say that the light would the Quran is that light, and he was the one with the two lights for that reason. But more than likely, it was because of the fact that he married the two daughters of the Prophet, which was a huge honor. I mean, and it's a huge name on its own. So in relation to the Prophet Muhammad, how was he then related? Well, obviously, the easy way to see it is he was later on, Muhammad was his father-in-law. Right, so he was the son-in-law of the Prophet. That's one way, the easy way. Then there's also a bit more of a complicated way, which is the Prophet father, Abdullah, had a twin sister named Hakim al-Bayda. Okay, so this is Prophet. This is his father Abdullah, and he has a twin sister. Supposedly, they said it was a twin sister historically, and her name was Hakim. Okay, she had a daughter named Arwa bint Quraysh, and Arwa's daughter was Uthman. Okay, in other words, the Prophet Muhammad's cousin's son is Uthman. So the Prophet Muhammad's cousin is this lady by the name of Arwa, and her son is Uthman radiallahu anhu. And again, another way to put it is Uthman's mother, Arwa, is the cousin of the Prophet. So that's another way that he was already related to the Prophet before marrying one of his daughters. In the period of Jahiliyyah, before Islam, again, he had a kunya by the name of Abu Amr, and after later on, Ruqayya radiallahu anhu would give birth to a son named Abdullah. So that's when his kunya was changed to Abu Abdullah. Once he was grown up, people said that Uthman radiallahu anhu was a man of average height. He had big bones. He was very big boned. He had broad shoulders. He was known to have a huge, thick beard. And he had a soft skin with a bald spot, and he had a very handsome face. People would say he was overall light in complexion, skin complexion, and he had a very nice looking, handsome face, and people used to admire. People used to have a smile on their face by looking at him. He brought that pleasant air by just looking at him. And his hair used to fall down below his ears, and all these traits which the Arabs spoke about that gave him that kind of pleasant company. People used to again sit with him, like to talk to him, be around him, like to be with him and see him. Right, he had that aura about him. Altogether, in his life, he had 8 wives throughout the period of his life. From 5 of his wives, he had 9 sons, and also from 5 of his wives, he had 7 daughters. One of his sons, actually his name was Aban, he became the governor of Medina at some time, and he also became a leading scholar of fiqh. And Uthman radiallahu himself had 3 brothers. This was his family. And Uthman radiallahu himself would actually become a scholar himself, obviously, because he, as it would turn out, he would also become one of the very close companions of the Prophet. Obviously, one of the Khulafa, and it made sense only that he would become one of the scholars, also one of the leading scholars. Obviously, he was one of the Khulafa Rashidun, but he was also one of the Ashar al-Bashra, one of the 10 that was promised Jannah. Obviously, huge deal. If you promise Jannah, I'm not sure what else you could ask for. So that honor was there. And there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ spoke about him being the most sincere in modesty. He used to single out people. So the Prophet ﷺ would say, the one who was most brave, or the one who has the most knowledge, or the one who was most generous was this and that and that. He would call out Abu Bakr, he would call out Umar. For the one who was most sincere and the one who was high in modesty, he would point out and single out Uthman radiallahu anhu. That's what the Prophet ﷺ would speak out and announce to people praise about Uthman radiallahu anhu like that. Okay, again, huge deal. So altogether, if we actually look at historically how long Uthman radiallahu anhu lived, it was said he lived from 576 AD to 656 AD. That was his lifetime. If you take into account everything from, again, before Islam in his Jahiliyyah, all the way up to him becoming a Khalifa and then eventually being assassinated. He was likely the fourth man to accept Islam, which is already tells you a lot, because he accepted Islam in a very, very early period during the days in Mecca where the Muslims had to hide in the valleys, and in a time where it was extremely dangerous to call for this movement, to stand by the movement, this new socio-political movement, reforming movement that was by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that would bring change to the peninsula against the political leadership of the Quraysh. So at that time, Uthman radiallahu anhu was already there to support, and he became Muslim through the da'wah, through Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu giving da'wah to him. And he didn't hesitate. Again, it's very, very important to understand that when certain people receive the message of Islam, when they hear Islam as it is, it's almost like they were waiting for it. And it was said that before the day that Abu Bakr anhu gave that da'wah to Uthman radiallahu anhu, Uthman radiallahu anhu either had some sort of a dream or he had some sort of experience he talked about. Like he was there on a trip. Uthman radiallahu anhu was really, really going out on trips a lot, business trips. And he was on a business trip, and he said that he in the middle of his sleep, either it was a dream or experience he felt, he felt somebody calling out and saying that there was something going to happen the next day. And either it was the coming of the Prophet or something that got his attention. It was a clear sign. It was something out of the ordinary. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted him with that even before he got the message of Islam. Finally, when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu came, that was the deal. Uthman radiallahu anhu never worshipped idols himself. He also stayed away from most of the, if not all of the ills and the practices of the Arabs, from, again, the cheating, the zina, the alcohol, the gambling. He was free from all of that. So when finally someone came to him telling him, by the way, here's the right way to live life, it's to take Allah as our ultimate legislator, as our hakim, as our ilah, as the one that governs us as human beings and societies, and we have a test in life, and we are only here for a short time, and there's a prophet that's been sent to reform this entire civilization of the Arabs and the world after that. Uthman radiallahu anhu was ready to accept and join this cause, join the da'wah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he declared, he took his shahada, he became Muslim, and he was now a believer, and he was again now part of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's crew, learning and growing from there. But he obviously became his own man of his own, and he would have his own circles. He had obviously a large network and a large group of people that he had access to from doing business, from his skills, from his ability to connect with people. And he became a strong da'i very, very closely right after he became Muslim. He was ready for the message. He was ready to hear, and it was just a matter of time that it would reach him. And again, historians say that he was the fourth person or the fourth man to accept Islam. So one of the very first few people to become Muslim. So because of that, because of the fact that he was already one of the pioneers and early acceptors of Islam, and he was very, very close to this group of Muslims, they were tested the most. He was very, very close to the Prophet Muhammad himself, and he was a very, very close student. Like, he would pick up whatever he could learn, and he would stick with him, and he would go with him wherever he went. He would really love and fall in love and adore, really, really get addicted to and adore the Quran in particular. People said that Uthman really, really, really specially loved the Quran. Of course, he loved the Prophet ﷺ, and he was with him every step of the way. But when he wasn't with the Prophet ﷺ, you would see him reciting, speaking, acting, talking, walking the Quran. I'll give you some statements that he mentioned about when he talked about the Quran and what the Quran meant to him in his life. One statement was, he said once that if our hearts were truly pure, if we really had clean hearts, we would never have enough of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another time he said that I would not like a single day to come when I don't look at the covenant or the word of Allah or the Mus'haf or the Quran itself. He would not let a single day pass without looking at, thinking about, reflecting, reciting something from the Quran. And sometimes, again, it was said that he would recite the Quran for long, long amounts into the night, deep into the night in his Qiyamul Layl. He said once that 3 things have been made very dear to me. 1, feeding the hungry. 2, clothing the ones that don't have clothing, and reading and reciting the Quran. One of the wives of Uthman once said that, especially during the times of when the fitna happened during his khilafah, during his rule, she said that, either you kill him or you leave him alone, for I swear by Allah, he would recite the whole Quran in 1 rak'ah when praying Qiyamul Layl. And that's obviously crazy on its own. That's insane if you just heard that statement, subhanAllah. So he was also, again, walking with, sticking close to the Prophet, not letting him go, to the point where he actually became one of the scribes. He was one of the scribes of the Prophet when the Quran was being revealed. In the early days, as it was going, he would note down exactly what he could of the Quran itself, again, memorizing, collecting, learning, and he became hafid of the Quran, unsurprisingly. And yeah, exactly, 100%. That's hours in 1 rak'ah, Brother Tanvir. But that was what he was used to. It was said that not many people could compete with the top Sahaba, which was one of them was Uthman radiallahu anhu, in their Qiyamul Layl deep into the night. And they would be mesmerized by the recitation, and they would be, again, entrenched. Uthman radiallahu anhu was really, really entrenched with the Quran. He couldn't get enough of it. He told everybody, spend every day with the Quran. Walk and talk and breathe and eat the Quran and sleep with the Quran and everything in between. So that was his life. Very, very close attachment to the Quran, very, very close student of the Prophet ﷺ. Now I'll tell you a little bit about what it was like during the days of Mecca when there was lots of persecution under the Quraysh. He had been tied up by his uncle, and he was one of those that were, even though he was extremely loved, people still turned on him. Even though people had this respect for him and they loved him and the Quraysh loved him, it was said that he had an uncle who tied him up, and it was one of the things that was commonplace was either the Sahaba were the lower class Sahaba, the ones who were the slaves and the ones that didn't have tribes to look after them, or they were from a more poor tribe. They were either beaten or tied up and tortured, or they were boycotted. But the more upper class ones, either they were still beaten, but maybe a lot less frequently. But one other way was to put them under house arrest, and they were held by their family members until they said that they weren't going to follow Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam anymore. So Uthman was one of them. He was tied up, and his uncle tried to force him and pressure him out of giving up Islam, to denounce Islam, to leave everything he now signed up for. But Uthman obviously didn't give in, and he stayed firm, and then eventually his uncle and his family gave up and let him do what he wanted to do. And that, was his life in Mecca. Obviously after Hijrah, before Hijrah, I should also mention, he was one of the members that the group that actually also went to Hijrah before Hijrah, which was they took refuge in Abyssinia. At the time when the Muslims faced so much persecution, they became refugees under the king al-Najashi in Abyssinia. Uthman radiallahu anhu was one of that group that was led by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib anhu, that made that pilgrimage, that hijrah to Abyssinia to live as refugees there under peace, away from the Quraysh because of the harsh treatment they faced in Mecca. So it was said that Uthman anhu and his wife, they both did that hijrah together, and they were the first family that did that hijrah together to Abyssinia. And so that was, he was with that group for some time, and then eventually would do hijrah to Medina afterwards. So in Medina now, that's where the Prophet Muhammad is now the state authority. He is the Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's been given the political leadership by the Aus and Khazraj, and the Ansar are now one tribe, and they everything in Medina is now run according to the commands of the Prophet, which is also coming from the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So people would come and whatever business they would do, they would regulate and make sure it was done according to the Prophet. The social welfare, the marriage and divorces, and then the treatment of the poor and sick and elderly and the orphans, and then securing the borders and military. All of it was under the rule and guidance of the political leadership of the Prophet Muhammad. The state of Medina became the very first state of Islam, the first society of Islam, the Islamic state formed under the rule of the Prophet Muhammad. And that's where in Medina Uthman took his place also. The Sahaba, like Uthman, the ones that were closest, they were working day and night. They were up in the forefront, they building Medina. They were either running around, feeding the poor, making sure people who didn't have family and background to go to, they were homeless, and that's how Yathrib was before Yathrib became Medina. The Sahaba had to build it. They had to go into and do the dirty work to take care of people, look after them, look at and see what their needs were. They built the Prophet's masjid, and they were housing people there who were homeless and poor and sick, and made sure nobody was out in the streets, and they made sure that everyone had food. They made sure that if there was any crimes committed by anybody, they were held to account. And so in the entire close group of Sahaba and especially Uthman ibn Affan was part of all of that in Medina society, looking after people, running from day to day. And of course, from time to time, when call for battle would come to defend the borders of Medina, or to capture a particular caravan, or to make a conquest, whatever it might be, they were running day in, day out like that. Uthman who was one of them, who was at the forefront doing all of that. I'll zone in now, inshallah, to a little bit more about specifically what Uthman did in Medina. His role, he was obviously, again, doing all these things like we mentioned, but he had a particular personality. He was, again, more of the lenient and more nice guy kind of mentality. And he was extremely generous, and he was extremely, had a heightened sense of empathy and care for the poor in particular. So he would look out for people in Medina that needed care, welfare, food, shelter, money, finances, any kind of caretaking. And so he took it upon himself because he was wealthy. Allah gifted him throughout his life. Again, I'll take you back to what we said earlier. When he was really young, he was gifted with that skill and affluence and his family business, which forced him to gain leadership and management skills and people skills to the point where he was extremely a successful entrepreneur. He knew how to connect, he knew how to sell, he knew how to make lots of money. He was an affluent entrepreneur and businessman. He would now use that in Medina to become one of the biggest funders of the da'wah itself. In other words, the da'wah to establish Islam throughout society, to bring it to the world, to run the affairs of people, taking care of them, looking after their social welfare, regulating justice, all of that. He would be now taking the specific role of funding the da'wah itself, meaning whenever there was a moment in time that required huge funds because there was a shortage of resources, or the Prophet Muhammad would make an announcement to people, and he would say that right now we're facing a crisis, we're facing a moment where we actually need funds, we're a shortage in supplies, and There's lots of people who are hungry, and we need to feed the poor. We need to take care of the orphans. We need to equip the soldiers with arms and weapons, and we need to invest in some more funding for camels and horses, and we need equipment. We need to expand the masjid or something, whatever it might be. Whenever these announcements by the Prophet would come, Uthman was on the hunt. He would look and he would be very keenly watching, just always on the lookout for when the opportunity would come to just throw his money toward those causes. And this is what you want to understand, is that when you get into a situation where you start giving money for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah says in the Quran, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ أَنبَتَتْ سَبْعَ سَنَابِلَ فِي كُلِّ سُنبُلَةٍ مِائَةُ حَبَّةٍ وَاللَّهُ يُضَاعِفُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Which means that the way that it works, the way sadaqah and really giving your money to Allah when times come, when the opportunities come, is like multiplication. It's like grains of corn that multiply. It's like you just plant a little seed, or you just harvest a little bit, but you see the corns come in numbers, and you see each of those grains bring reward after reward. When you give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you donate to sadaqah, which is actually just to take care of, it could be the basic sadaqah, which is a sunnah, to give to someone who's in need, just a brother and sister who's in need. The Prophet would tell people that helping your brother, for example, in a time of need, is more valuable than is more beloved to Allah than doing 1 month of itikaf in this masjid. And especially speaking of itikaf, it's Ramadan. You would think itikaf is the most amazing obligation, or greatest thing we could do, because it's a personal ibadat, right? One of the personal ibadat. Yet the Prophet says that helping a brother in time of need is more valuable than doing your personal ibadah, which is your personal worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is itikaf for a full month. But not only that, the Prophet didn't even say that in his own, didn't just say that on his own for any masjid. He actually said that about his masjid. So he's doing 1 month of itikaf at the Prophet's masjid. The Sahaba, like Uthman, really took this to heart. They understood that the obligation to the nation, to the ummah, to the people, to your brothers and sisters comes even before your personal ibadat, before your salah, before your Quran, before your fasting, before your individual itikaf. It comes before that. They understood that. And because of that, they were always on the hunt. Again, you could give sadaqah, which is just to take care of your brother and sister in the time of need. They were looking for these moments. Uthman was looking for these moments. But on top of that, he would look for ways to progress the da'wah. And what we mean by the da'wah here is to progress Islam as a full socio-political entity, meaning the state itself. He would fund the state, the funds of the state. He would fund, again, the soldiers, the food and shelter, and then the armies, and then the masjid and everything that funds Islam altogether as a full state. He would be looking for those moments. So that's not just a regular sadaqah anymore. That's a special sadaqah that's actually giving your money for a fard now. It's sunnah anymore, because it becomes a fard kifaya on the Muslims to progress and maintain the da'wah as it is. And here at the time of the Prophet, the da'wah means to look out for the borders in Islam. It means to expand and grow and look out to preserving and providing and taking care of the state itself. So Uthman was always looking for moments like these. I'll tell you a few stories about when he did such things, okay? And subhanAllah, some of them are very, very powerful and very, very heartwarming. In Medina, there was a moment where there was still, obviously, under the rule of Islam, under the Prophet's rule, there was 3 tribes that were the Jewish tribes that were still ruling there, or they were living there, and they were allowed to live there according to even ruling by the Torah if they wanted to. And there was one there was a couple of these really also successful Jewish businessmen and tribe leaders among the influential ones, the affluent ones. And one Jewish man used to own this well, okay, and he would charge a really high price for people coming to take water from that well. And Uthman radiallahu anhu took notice of that, and he saw that it was causing a lot of distress for some people. The poor of the lower class would go to that water, to that well, and they would ask the Jewish man for some water, and he would just charge them. He would actually, there was even more political history to this, because there was political tension between now this new rulership and new order in Medina. The Jewish tribes did not like that. They did not like how things were changing in Medina, and actually they wanted that political authority for themselves. They wanted the Jewish tribes to have that. Because of that, there was a tension, and because of that, the Jews were always, either causing direct trouble or indirect trouble in Medina. So this Jewish man was, he owned this well, it was his property, and he was taking advantage of it. He was charging lots of money to the poor to just access some water from that well. And what ended up happening was Uthman radiallahu anhu saw that, and he went to the man. And obviously Uthman radiallahu anhu is a pretty rich person, and he can put down offers like, how much do you charge for this well, right? So he's going to now negotiate with this Jewish man, and he asks him, name your price, I'll pay what you want for this well. And he starts to negotiate with this Jewish man, and this Jewish man refuses, and they're going back and forth. He says, no, I'm not going to give you this well, I'm not going to sell you this well, even though Uthman radiallahu anhu negotiates back and forth. To the point, finally, the Jewish man says, all right, this is a good price that I'm happy with. Well, I'm going to give you the well. I'll give you the well for half the time of the week. We'll share the well. Okay, so some of the days will alternate. I'll have the well for some time, and then you will also have the well for some of the time. So Uthman radiallahu anhu owned half of the share of that well. During his shifts, during the days where he owned the well, whoever was poor would come up to that well, so they would ask for water, and Uthman radiallahu anhu would give that water for a very, very reasonable amount, and he would be very cheap, and he would just give it very, very easily to the people. And he also instructed them that make sure when you take water from me, you take 2 days worth of water, okay? Because so that you don't have to go to this well when the Jewish man it's his shift, because he's going to charge you a lot more extra. So take 2 days worth of water, and you'll be good. You don't need to go to him and pay him that high amount he's asking for. So people started doing this, and what ended up happening was very few people were going to the well on the days that the Jewish man had that shift, to the point where the Jewish man got very frustrated, and he was like, he went to Uthman radiallahu anhu, and he's like, okay, you can have the full well, just because he wasn't getting any traction anymore. So Uthman radiallahu anhu very fairly pressured, and he bought that well, first half of it, and then he took ownership of the full well, and then he was just like, he was giving water left and right to the people in Medina very easily like that. So that was one thing. He owned that well. Uthman owned that well. Again, used it to supply to the people there. And number two, and I'll give you another instance in Medina, was when the Prophet ﷺ was looking for expansion of his masjid. The masjid, the Prophet's time, was used for not just prayers. Actually, it was used for it was for prayers and staying and growing at the masjid as a community center. So it actually housed the homeless. There was a place in the masjid known as a sufa. It would take care of the homeless and those who didn't have families to go back to, those who were sick. And the Ansar would sometimes bring in huge amounts of money to feed like 80 people in the night, or they would also teach people the Quran. They would teach them life skills so that they would go and grow and get their own jobs afterwards. And that's what the functions of the masjid was. It also served as a hospital for anyone that was injured during battle, as well as anyone that needed help in society, that was sick. It was also a military command center. So sometimes the big chiefs of tribes that the Prophet ﷺ would allocate and discharge and position would meet at the Prophet's masjid, and they would discuss the political affairs of the community. of the Ummah, and they would talk about advancements and movements and strategies and all of that. So it came to a point where the masjid became too small because of all the needs of the masjid, because of how things were now coming along, and they wanted to expand the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ made an announcement, and Uthman radiallahu anhu actually went and bought the person's house that was next to the masjid for a high price, and he offered that to the Prophet ﷺ so that that land could be used to expand the masjid. That was again Uthman radiallahu anhu funding the da'wah to expand this masjid. Again, a big need for the Ummah at the time, a big need which the Prophet ﷺ looked for help. He was there to help the Prophet ﷺ at that time, a big moment. Another big moment was during the Battle of Tabuk against the Romans, again in Medinan society, under the rule of the Prophet ﷺ. Rasulullah ﷺ made an announcement, and he said that whoever provides their profits to support the soldiers in this battle, which is now against one of the battles against the Romans, they will have their sins forgiven. It was a guarantee by the Prophet ﷺ, that if you were to fund in this particular expedition, Allah is going to forgive you your sins, which is a huge opportunity again. Uthman radiallahu anhu stepped again on the front line, ready to jump at the opportunity, and and you have to understand, he's been until this point growing, and his wealth is multiplying. He gives more for the sake of Allah. Allah multiplies his wealth, throws back more money right at him. He again throws more money for the sake of Allah, and again it's multiplying and growing into a point where he is really, really wealthy. Okay, and historians tell us that sometimes he would give so much, and this particular expedition, which is the Tabuk expedition, he gave something like 940 camels along with 60 horses for this expedition, which is equivalent. Camels are like cars, and horses are probably kind of like cars, but maybe sometimes more expensive because of depends, I guess. If you have red camels, they're like Ferraris at this time, and horses are like extremely valuable at the time of war. And at that time, during Medinan life after Hijrah, horses were very, very rare. To have one or two horses is a lot. Uthman gave 60 horses. He provided and funded 60 horses to this expedition. On top of that, in addition to that, he gave 10,000 dinars. It was such a big moment in the funding this campaign, funding this moment in the da'wah, and looking forward to this moment when Uthman radiallahu was ready to give this, and he just gave it all right away. The Prophet ﷺ came to Uthman radiallahu with a very, very special praise. He singled him out again. He went to him, talked to him, made a special dua to him, and said the following: "May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive you, O Uthman, for anything you do in public or in private, anything you do until the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah." SubhanAllah. This was the Prophet's special dua to Uthman radiallahu anhu. He imagined having the Prophet come to you directly and give you this very special, specific dua that Allah, oh, may Allah forgive you all your sins, public and private, everything you do until the Day of Judgment. That's the dua the Prophet made for Uthman at this time. Okay, so that was Medina life. Now if we fast forward to the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and this time there was again lots of fitan and lots of challenges that the state faced. And this time, at the end of the day, you have Islam being the guiding and ruling ideology for the people. It's what made people into a whole society, a whole nation on its own. And people have a strong level of tawakkul and trust in Allah overall, in generality. And they're looking to always fight the challenges that come. Sometimes there's these wars taking place that threaten the well-being of the Muslims. Sometimes there are caravans being lost. Sometimes there's trouble within the lands. And especially during the time of Abu Bakr, there was quite a lot of fitna altogether, that challenges that was being faced. And of course, I'm sure this was already talked about in the section of Abu Bakr. But there's one particular moment in that time where the Baytul Mal, the funds of the treasury of the state, was empty at least to some point. And people were asking for food, and they were looking for funds, to finances, uh, to feed them, to have food. Uthman radiallahu anhu at this time, again, looking out for the state, looking out for how he can always support and fund the state, he had these trade caravans with food coming from Damascus and Yemen. And it was very, very common, again, for Uthman radiallahu anhu to make these big business trips to Damascus and Syria and Yemen and all the places around, talking to some very big, influential tribe leaders and business entrepreneurs and people who own land and wealth and stock and farmland and all of that. And he was negotiating, always doing business with them, always on the move, taking care of his business, organizing and making deals. So what happened was, at this time, he had some trade caravans with food from Damascus and Yemen. And those merchants were now doing business with him, and he faced a conflict. Okay, the conflict was, again, this was a time of need for the state. This is the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and the state needs more funds again. And they actually they're in a desperate moment where they're not able to feed people who are asking for some funds. So he had a choice. He could either sell, he could do business with these merchants in Damascus and Yemen, and he could sell these trade caravan filled with goods and foods to them, okay? Or he could somehow, donate, or he could somehow sell that to the people that are asking for it in Abu Bakr's time, so in the region of the Khilafah at this time. So he had a choice, and what ended up happening was the merchants started offering lots and lots of money to Uthman radiallahu anhu. They gave him a price, okay, and Uthman radiallahu anhu said no. Okay, the merchants said, all right, we raise our price. What do you want for these goods and these caravans you have filled with food and stocks, and what we're looking for these goods, we want them. Here's a higher price. Uthman radiallahu anhu rejected them. They kept offering a higher and higher price until he finally said, no, I'm not doing business with you. And he said a quote which might puzzle some people, okay? And I'm curious to see what you guys might think about this. So I'll even maybe ask you guys this question. Uthman radiallahu anhu said to him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offers higher. Okay, the offering that you have is not competing with the offer that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has offered for me. So I'm not gonna sell you these the goods I have in these trade caravans. So I'm gonna offer it, to Allah. Allah offers a higher price than the merchants. What do you guys think this means, like on a literal level? Because figuratively you might see, oh yeah, of course, that he's giving for the sake of Allah, so Allah offers higher. What does that really mean? I want to ask you guys, inshallah, quick question for everybody here. What does Uthman radiallahu anhu mean when he's denying these offers, these higher prices by the merchants to buy his goods in this time of need of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and the Khilafah of the time? But he's saying no to them, and he's saying that Allah offers higher. Does anyone want to take a guess over here? Sure, yeah. Allah is more generous, but what does that really mean? What does it mean that Allah is more generous? Okay, so he wanted to give them out, but what does that have to do with Allah being more generous? Like, why is he saying? It's almost like he's saying that. Actually, it was said that he was saying somebody else was offering him a higher price. Every time the merchants were offering something, he would say, no, I have a higher price. And then finally they got to a point, they hit the wall, and he said, my other person I'm doing finance with, or the other buyer, is Allah. He's offering a higher price. What does that mean here? I like that. So a human can never top Allah's power, sure, but again, what does it mean Allah's offering? So okay, this is one answer I was thinking. Allah gives more ajr for paying sadaqah. That's the typical answer we might actually hear. Okay, most Muslims, most of us would say this, okay, that Allah's going to give more ajr, reward for not spending, not giving it to the merchants, not trading with them. But again, instead of trading with the merchants, he's trading with Allah. How do you trade with Allah? What does that mean? What does it mean that Allah is the other buyer here? And one answer again is people will say, well, he's somehow giving it for Allah, and it's way more. Again, it's never ending. It's something that's the merchants can never top. But again, it sounds so figurative. It doesn't seem like it's not like Uthman radiallahu anhu is doing physical trade with Allah, is he? Right? But the way he's speaking about it is as if he's doing a physical transaction with Allah. In other words, he's selling. Okay, he's selling his goods and his merchandise to Allah, which is a higher price. What does it mean to sell to Allah? And that Allah will buy with a higher price. And one answer again is ajr in the akhirah, which is reward in the akhirah. But I really want you guys to think here. It's something that we mentioned earlier, okay? What did we say earlier about how if you give for the sake of Allah, Allah multiplies that and returns back to you in countless multiple amounts to the point where you can't even count. It just goes and multiplies and grows. Wallahu yudha'ifu liman yasha. Allah multiplies, it increases. So in other words, every time you give amount of money, Allah multiplies it and gives you in the next few months and to the year more and more and more. So that's actually a very literal transaction. What I want you guys to think about is one thing he could do here. Uthman radiallahu anhu could trade with this merchant here who's offering a high price and he gets some amount back. But what he's going to do now is he takes this merchandise, he takes these goods to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, okay? And he gives all of it free of charge, which was again a huge price, to the state. He gives it to the state of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. We said that if you give for Allah, Allah is going to multiply you in amounts which you can't even imagine, and it's going to continuously come. So in other words, what Uthman radiallahu anhu just did was what he's talking about, that he has a higher buyer, right? He has a better buyer. His better buyer, stronger buyer, the one that's giving him a higher price is Allah himself. Why? Because he's going to give these funds. He's going to trade literally with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's going to go and give it to the state. He's going to fund the da'wah. And in general, and eventually what's going to happen is Allah's going to give him his the price, the transaction that Uthman radiallahu anhu sold them for, which is multiplying higher and higher and higher and growing way more than what the merchants were offering. So it's a literal transaction. What I want you guys to understand is it's not just an ajr for the akhirah. Yes, the reward for the akhirah is there, but it's an ajr. It's not even an ajr. It's a physical monetary reward in the dunya itself. Okay, so Allah is therefore the literal higher, better buyer. Allah has offered a higher price because of the multiplication of the wealth. Is that clear to everybody? It's a very, very important thing to understand that when you do transaction and trade with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives you a price. He gives you an amount that no merchant can match. And I'm saying this as just from the fact that Allah multiplies. That's the nature of giving to Allah. He multiplies in a way you're going to see, like right before your eyes, funds and money and from different angles just filling up your bank account. So Uthman radiallahu anhu is actually, people said he spoke about this in very literal terms. He said that I have a better buyer. I have a buyer that was giving me a better price. Meaning I do transaction with him, I do a trade with him, and he's going to multiply it to a point where none of these merchants can match. And that's what it was. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the literal other buyer over here. And he gave again this money completely for free, these funds to all his property to the state, and that would again help the Muslims in one of the most dire times of need, or at least one of the nice moments in time where they were relieved from the fact that there were big supporters and big funders like Uthman radiallahu anhu that was looking after them when the Baytul Mal, this treasury of the funds of the state, was empty. So yeah, 100%, and that's really what it shows, that you really need to understand that if you just took these lessons alone from the mindset of Uthman radiallahu anhu, you would look at life differently. You wouldn't ever be stingy about your wealth. If you just looked at what happens here, the nature of how Allah multiplies and returns wealth when you do transaction with him, the mindset and the way that Uthman radiallahu anhu spoke about giving his wealth and doing transaction, a trade with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you would do is exactly the same type of thing Uthman would do wherever you go in life. You would actually look at how much money you have in your account. You would look at, you would fish out, you would hunt for opportunities, like the way Uthman radiallahu anhu did. And you would look for any opportunity at all to throw your money, not hoard it, but actually throw it at any cause for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you expect, you know, that it's coming back, and it's not just coming back, it's coming back stronger, multiplied way more than it was before. So that's the mindset of Uthman, to always be on the hunt, to always be looking out for causes, to give your money away to just so that you have the amount that you need to take care of your own expenses and your own finances, but the rest of it is always kind of like you have that safe cushion, but the rest of it is really luxury, and you're always giving out that luxury amount for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always expecting much more in return. So it's a really, just up till this point, really, I would say it's already a valuable enough mindset and lesson we can take away from the life of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Okay, so if that wasn't already, inshallah, amazing enough, we will continue. Now we will proceed toward his Khilafah. So Uthman radiallahu anhu himself was actually one of the Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was one of the leaders of the believers, eventually one of the Khulafa Rashidun, one of the four that followed the method of the Prophet Muhammad and followed the exact guidance. He had his own personality, his own way of doing it, but he would also be very, very strict upon keeping the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad. In other words, the Khalifa needs to be appointed by the people. There's not going to be appointment by father to son or something like that, or any form of kingship or any form of illegitimate authority given to the new ruler, to the new Khalifa. And Uthman radiallahu anhu kept this, and he was appointed in this proper way of his rulership. And the way he was appointed Khalifa was the following. Umar radiallahu anhu was injured, and he, right very, very, very close to his death, what he would do was he would appoint 6 people who would choose the next Khalifa after his death. And he assigned a 3-day deadline. He said to them that you have 3 days to choose from among you 6, to appoint someone as the new Khalifa, because it's the most important matter of for the entire Muslims, for the well-being of the state and the political affairs and the social welfare and then the economic stability and everything in between. The most important thing is to appoint the next Khalifa after my death. These 6 were Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, Abdullah bin Zubair ibn Al-Awan radiallahu anhu, Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, so he was one of them, Talha ibn Ubaydullah radiallahu anhu, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu. And Umar radiallahu anhu actually told them that if you have a disagreement, pick the majority vote and even kill the minority if you have to. And this was all of the Sahaba understood how important this was to elect the next Khalifa timely. And if there was ever a tie vote, they agreed that Umar gave them the instruction that defer to Abdurrahman bin Auf, he would be the deciding vote. And so these 6 would be the ones that would consult. And actually what ended up happening was, at the very beginning, when they were discussing, they couldn't quite choose the next Khalifa. So what they said was they decided to all forego their own thought process and opinion, and they said that they will let Abdurrahman bin Auf have that deciding vote. He would just be the one that would choose the Khalifa, the next Khalifa. And he preferred Uthman radiallahu anhu over Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali ibn Abi Talib was the close second. So he did that, and he basically said that this was now rest assured Uthman radiallahu anhu was the more qualified, and he's going to choose. He's going to now lead, succeeding Umar radiallahu anhu. He's going to follow actually the footsteps of both Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhu as the 3rd Khalifa. And what he's now actually particularly saying is the following. He wanted to be very, very literal and close, even though he had his own different personality and his way of looking at and taking care of the people, he had a quote. He said the following. He said, I have been given the responsibility and I've accepted it. I'm a follower of the Sunnah, and I'm not someone who brings new innovations. And I promise you that in addition to the following of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah of the Prophet, I will do three things. This was the approach to ruling. He said that I will follow the example of the Shaykhan, which means those who came before me in terms of what they established and what they brought, which was Abu Bakr and Umar. He said that I'm going to follow how they structured things, how they did things, and I will carry on leading the Muslims, and I will organize the entire political architecture according to how Abu Bakr and Umar left it. And that's number one. Number two, I will do three things, following the example of those who came before me with regard to what you have agreed upon and decided, and what is decided by good openly by the people, and not interfering with you except when there is a capital punishment required. So he actually set some boundaries. He said that I'm going to be very lenient. My style is a little more lenient, and he gave this indirect kind of announcement. And but I will keep structure like the way Abu Bakr and Umar kept it, but at the same time, I have some boundaries, which is anytime anyone does anything that crosses a crime that necessitates a capital punishment, I will carry it out. I'll be very strict on those matters. And then he said in the same quote, the world is a tempting place. The dunya is very tempting, and it makes itself very attractive to people. So that people, what happens is many people are inclined towards it, and they will fall for the temptations. And he said that don't be content with this dunya and don't put your trust in it, for it is not trustworthy. Understand that these temptations of the dunya will not go away unless you ignore them. And what he's now saying, and what he's hinting at, is there's going to be a time of lots of prosperity. During the earlier days and in Medina, and also during the time of Abu Bakr, there was lots of challenges. But the social welfare of the Muslims would start to become a lot better as times go on. But that's also a test on its own. You always want to remember that Allah says in the Quran, which means both in Allah will test you in both hardship and good, both shar and khayr. And sometimes the test of good is actually more difficult than the test of hardship, because in the test of good, you don't remember Allah. You don't feel like you need Him as much anymore. And because of that, He was now warning the people that don't get tempted by the good things that's going to come in the dunya, and it's going to don't get too carried away thinking you'll live forever. Don't get too again, like absorbed with how much prosperity we're having, how well we're doing financially, and all of that. That's gonna be very, very tempting. But watch out for all of that. And so during his rule, he gave these warnings, and as Khalifa, he would send out letters to his governors. He said the following. He wrote a letter specifically to his governors. He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered rulers to become protectors of society and not to become tax collectors. Meaning you're not just a bunch of people that go and collect tax of people and things which you're just like doing business, and you come to the door and you say, hello sir, I'm your tax collector, give what's due to the state, and then you leave, and you have a cold relationship with people. But instead he said that the rulers and governors are protectors of society, and they should be taking genuine interest in the affairs of the Muslims, to the point where even with your enemies, you must hold your conduct very high and upright. This was a quote, one of his speeches he gave in one of the khutbahs of Uthman radiallahu anhu. He told people to really genuinely care for people as if you're not just a money collector, a tax collector. You're going to their houses, you're building a relationship with them, and you need to care for them, look out for what's hurting their pain points, their times of trouble, and you need to look out for where maybe the state missed out on giving some rights to them. You need to ask them about that. That's your job as a governor. This is the quote. This is the instruction of Uthman radiallahu anhu during his time of rule. And on top of that, even if you're dealing with enemies of Islam living in our borders, they are citizens, and you need to hold them with justice and fairness, and you need to treat them when they do right and good. you need to uphold justice for them, even if it goes against some of the Muslims. Even with your enemies, you must hold a high and upright conduct and just dealings with them. So again, this letter was sent out to all his governors, and the governors got the message in these letters. He also sent out letters to commanders of the armies, and he had a special message for them as well. He said, you, O commanders, right, the commanders of the armies, you are the protectors of Islam from the hands of its enemies. You should always be mindful of your conduct. Again, a strong message of taqwa. So even before Umar who passed away, the final message that meaning Umar ibn Khattab gave to everybody was just to have taqwa. Believe it or not, the most important message is just to have taqwa. And Uthman carries that on. He pushes that forward, telling the governors, watch yourself, have mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear Allah when you deal with people. Same with the armies and the commanders. He's telling them, again, keep your conduct high, have taqwa, watch out for, again, you have a responsibility to care for and raise the sword for the sake of Islam, only for just and righteous reasons, and you can never be excessive, because Allah commands in the Quran to never be excessive, to fight in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but never ever exceed your boundaries. So again, he commands the commanders of the armies to have high taqwa. He also writes to, again, to the commanders, again, the soldiers, he says to them, you are the guardians of the Muslims and their shield. Umar radiallahu anhu gave you a particular mission. I gave you a certain vision of how we will do things, which is not hidden from us. We all know what it is. And I don't want to hear that any one of you has changed that vision, that structure Umar radiallahu anhu gave us. Otherwise, Allah will replace you with somebody else. Somebody else will take your positions, and we will carry on. So he was very, very firm on actually keeping what Umar radiallahu anhu had left. So he said, be wary and watch for what you do, and I shall try my best to fulfill, the mission and the task that Allah has given me. So again, he's writing these letters right at the beginning of his, as he became Khalifa, to the governors, to the commanders, to the tax collectors, to the soldiers. And he also sends one more letter again to the tax collectors, again, to the zakat officials and officers. He mails them and he gives them this letter, giving them this message where he says to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you on the basis of truth, and he accepts nothing but that which is based on truth. So take what is due, which is the zakat you're collecting, and give people their rights, what they're due, on the basis of the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I urge you to stick to and adhere to honesty. Pay a great deal of attention to, and do not be the first to neglect honesty. Fulfill covenants, and do not wrong the orphans or the non-Muslims who have a treaty with the Muslims, for Allah will be the enemy of the one who wrongs them. Again, a stern warning and message to the ones that are the zakat officials, the officers that are in charge of collecting the money between the people, the government agencies that are now under the governorship and the rulership of Uthman radiallahu anhu. He's now giving them a stern warning to always be watchful when they deal with money with people and when they collect money from people. And especially a huge emphasis on being honest, being truthful, and then never ever neglect even a concern that comes from out of somebody, one of the citizens, that says something about maybe a miscalculation in the money or something like that. Always be extremely thorough and honest. That's what Uthman ibn Affan's rule was. He was very particular on all of that. Then he sent a letter out to the masses of the Muslims. So now he's addressed the governors, he's addressed the tax collectors, he's addressed the soldiers and the armies, he's addressed again the wide the main office of governorship. So he's actually addressed the entire body of the Khilafah. Now he also addresses the masses of people. He goes and now writes a letter to and makes an announcement to this is a letter to the masses of the Muslims, to the public, to the entire body of the Ummah itself. He says the following: you have achieved what you have achieved by following the Quran and Sunnah. So don't let the dunya distract you from what matters. This ummah will start to follow new things, new innovations, and after three things come to you. Now he makes, again, he knows actually what happened was Uthman radiallahu anhu, he was aware at this time as he was ruling, much before when the Prophet Muhammad was alive, that there would be a fitna during his time. He was wary of it. He knew it was coming because it was already prophesied. Okay, and he would now give warnings to try to prevent it with whatever ability he could. So he gave some signs he knew from the Prophet ﷺ that would at least make people a little bit more aware, um, to catch the signs of the fitna, to prevent it from happening. So he even gave some strict signs that would happen. Like, for example, he said, when all kinds of luxury are attained, number one, when you see like lots of prosperity and luxury is now flowing in to the entire empire of Islam that's now been built after the time of Umar, when the children of your female slaves have grown up, that's also another sign. It's kind of a sign that shows that the fitna is coming, or new things are about to pop up that will cause trouble within the empire. And when the Bedouin and the non-Arabs have now adopted the Quran, because now Islam is really expanded and it's there. So these are the signs when you know that things have evolved, and he mentioned that real kufr actually results from not understanding the Arabic language. What happens is when people are faced with something that they don't understand from the Quran and Sunnah, they will actually start to make it up. They will put their own interpretations in, and they will make it complicated. This is one of his quotes. He said that kufr actually results from people misunderstanding the Arabic language. So that was his stern warning to the masses of people. Uthman radiallahu anhu actually established a shura council of the more senior Sahaba, companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as the council of the state. He composed this senior group, this council, and he made a request of the governors and commanders saying, continue as if you were working with Umar and do not change. Whatever decision you want to take, refer to us, the council, and we will gather the ummah for shura, and then we will give you an answer. He said he again would send out these letters, and he would announce to people, and he would give this warning, and he would make this emphasis that enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil. No believer should subject himself to humiliation, for I will be the weak against the strong, so long as he has been wronged, inshallah. So Uthman who stood by, he said that he would be the one that if any time something went wrong, one of the governors went corrupt, or there was misuse of property, or there was somebody that misused their power to go against some of the rights of the people, he would be the one standing in front of them. He would be the one standing for the rights of the one that were oppressed or abused or taken advantage of. This was the style of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Finally, let's go down to a little bit some of his most famous statements in his khutbahs. So we know now that his policy was a very, very clear form of standing for justice. He carried out, again, the punishments that as they were. And as we look at these statements, these famous statements of Uthman anhu during his khutbahs, you want to keep in mind that he was the type of individual that, although he had that lenient personality, again, like we mentioned, he actually even conducted a had punishment against his own brother, because his brother some witnesses testified that he had drunk some alcohol, and he dismissed him from his post. He took the post of a governor, but Uthman radiallahu anhu dismissed him when there was proofs shown that he misused that position, or he engaged in drinking alcohol. So with that in mind, you understand that Uthman radiallahu anhu always has this position of being extremely cautious about keeping that justice and making sure nobody is in a position where they're abusing their power and position. Again, he said once that if our hearts were really, really pure, we would never have our fill of the words of Rabb al-Alamin, of the entire Lord of all the creation that exists. No one conceals something in the heart except that Allah causes it to be seen on his face or in a slip of the tongue. And this is a very, very deep quote when I came across it, subhanAllah. He's saying that whatever things you're trying to hide, right, that your deepest, darkest sins and corruption, either you're in a position of power and authority, or you're just a layman, a citizen in society, and Uthman says that nobody will ever conceal it. You won't be able to hide it. You won't be able to hide what Allah causes to be seen, because the way He's going to make it appear is through your face, either your facial expressions and how you're conducting yourself is going to show, or slip of the tongue. You're going to say something that exposes something really deep, a deficient, dark spot in your heart. And this was what Uthman said. And he gave this. He would give these types of speeches to the people that were either the governors or the trusted positions or the officials or the people in power that he had, and to always strike them with that fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another quote which I really love, he said that things maybe if they cannot be achieved by the Quran, meaning the teachings of the Quran, which is what it's always encouraging people to engage in taqwa. But despite that, there's still criminals in society. There's still people who are engaging in major crimes like taking riba or breaking the fabric of society through zina, or a corrupt official, a governor, or an officer or a military commander that is abusing his position, that is committing a crime, and he's even now, let's say, even colluded with a few others to hide his crime, and then he's now taking bribes and all of that, right? In such situations, the Quran, you would think the Quran, with all its teaching, with all its warnings, with everything that the Quran explains about the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would keep people in check. But Uthman says that whoever is not kept in check by the teachings of the Quran this way, the Sultan will do that part. The Sultan will keep him in check. And this is one of the most powerful things he said, that the authority, which is the Khalifa, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, will be in charge of having that authority to keep the rule of law under the Quran and Sunnah, under the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the most sacred, which is the most which is the most powerful governing and most sacred authority that will keep everything in check. And if the teachings of the Quran is not doing it, then the law and enforcement of the Sultan, of the Emir himself would do that, would be in charge of that, would be responsible for that. One time he also said, concerned with, in his khutbahs, he said that concerned with this world is darkness in the heart, but concern with the hereafter, with the akhirah, is light in the heart. So you will see that if you're always worried about things that's the most concerning things in your dunya, you would see that you always have this sense of like grief or worry, or you're not in a good place overall. But concern of your akhirah puts you in a place where there's light coming out of your heart. One of the quotes by Uthman ibn Affan. And he said that the believer has 5 types of fear. The first is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may take his iman away, which is one of the biggest fears we might have as Muslims, which is, again, such a true statement, that we're really fearful that one day, we slip and we're not even Muslim anymore. And he's actually saying this, that one of the biggest fears that Muslims have is Allah takes their iman away. Number 2, that the recording angels, the ones that are writing down everything, that they have written down something, they will expose one of those sins or one of those things which they really deeply regret on Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of judgment in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third is that shaitan may cause his deeds to become invalid, which is again, may Allah protect us, as someone mentioned in the chat, that with all the good that you do and everything, maybe you sacrificed a lot for Allah, maybe you've done a lot for Islam, and you could see that these types of people that are really engrossed in da'wah and for Islam, they have another fear, which is, again, Uthman who so very nicely points out. He said the third fear is that we slip enough, or shaitan fuels us with something like either arrogance or something that makes all the good that we do invalid, which is again super, super scary. May Allah protect us. Fourth is that the angel of death may come to him without warning. Out of nowhere, you think everything, you have all these plans, and out of nowhere, without any sort of warning, angel of death comes and your time's up. Again, one of the biggest fears in Muslims. And the fifth is that this world may tempt him and distract him from the akhirah, which is, again, obviously a fear that we all have. So these were his speeches during his time as a Khalifa, his khutbahs. He would be emphasizing these points. During his rule, he was very well known for obviously the standardization of the Quran itself. One of the biggest, again, trials and challenges that came during the time of Uthman anhu was that people who were new to Islam, as Islam started to be expanded, they didn't know that the Quran was actually revealed in different dialects to make it easy for the different tribes to recite. And so for that reason, some of the tribes, they were looking at these ways the Quran was being recited, and they thought they were fabrications, or someone changed the Quran, or someone distorted the Quran. And because of the Quran being recited differently, people start to have fights. They would say things like, you're committing kufr because you're not, you changed the verse, and there's some difference about how the Surah Al-Baqarah was being recited. And they said that in particular, people in because of the fact that Islam had now become an empire and it was spreading far and wide, in particular, people in Asham, the region of Asham in Iraq, had differences in the recitation. And Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman was the one who saw that people were starting to get into actual fistfights, and they were having this kind of division, and they were Muslims. There were Muslims fighting Muslims. And he took this to Uthman anhu, and he brought this to his attention. He said that we need to do something about this, otherwise this is going to spread, and people are ignorant. They're not aware that there was a time where at the beginning, when the revelation was coming down, these dialects were there because of the fact that they were being re-revealed to make it easy for the different tribes to recite them. And so Uthman anhu took a decision after consulting with the Sahaba, and there was a debate on this also. They decided that what they would do is they would take the copy that was compiled by Abu Bakr anhu, which was the first compilation of the Quran, to keep it under one place. It was a written form compiled into one book, one mushaf. And he took that, which was now in different dialects, and he would standardize it into one main dialect, which was the original one, which is the Qurayshi dialect. This copy was with Hafsa radiallahu anha, and he assigned a committee of Sahaba, which was Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu, Abdullah bin Zubair, and Sa'id bin Abi As radiallahu anhu, and Abdurrahman bin al-Harith radiallahu anhu. They were in charge of standardizing this Musaf into a single dialect, and so that they would remove all the division that was taking place. People would not be confused anymore on why there's different drastic dialects of the Quran being recited. And so again, to this day, what we have is what Uthman anhu achieved during this time, which was the Uthmani script standardized and solidified into one dialect for the people, for ease of access, for ease of recitation. And that's what the Quran that we have today, which is the Qurayshi dialect. So this was one of the challenges that came, and they were able to overcome it during the time of Uthman anhu. But there were others that eventually came, and to the point where they eventually they weren't able to overcome them. And there was a fitna that was foretold, prophesied already by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that would come eventually for the entire Muslim Ummah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been, it was narrated by that he had said that you will face fitna and differences after I'm gone. And one of the people that said to him, okay, who could help us, Ya Rasulullah, at that time when this happens? He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that you should be with the one who is trustworthy and with his companions. And he pointed to Uthman radiallahu anhu. Another narration, again prophesizing the fitna that would come during the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu. It was narrated by Abu al-Ash'ath, said many people stood up to give speeches at Bayt al-Maqdis during the governorship of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and the last one to speak was a man by the name of Murrah bin Ka'b, who said, he also wanted to speak up to narrate a very powerful thing that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. He said that when that day would come, that day of trial, this man and those who are with him will be following truth and right guidance. And again, this is text there to clarify confusion during the time of fitna, meaning This is wahi itself. This is the words of the Rasulullah himself, where he's saying this man, and he's pointing directly to Uthman radiallahu anhu. During that time of fitna, rely on Uthman radiallahu anhu. Look to him, turn to him, and look for his guidance, because he will be the one that's on the right guidance. And people looked, and they saw he was the man that Rasulullah was talking about. Another hadith that prophesies this was when a man passed by with his head covered, and Rasulullah said, on that day, this man will be following the right guidance. I rushed, and the one who's narrating this hadith, he said, I rushed and grabbed Uthman by the upper arm, then I turned to his face, to the face of Rasulullah, and said, this man, and he said, yes, this man. There will be, there's another hadith that says there will be fitna, the figure of speech, like the horns of cows, but this man and those who are with him will be following the truth. And again, it was the narrator talks about he grabbed the cloak of the man that was nearby. It was Uthman radiallahu anhu, very clearly said. A famous Imam and historian, Imam al-Zuhri says, Uthman radiallahu anhu ruled for 12 years as Khalifa. During the first 6 years, of which the people did not criticize him for anything, and he was more beloved to the Quraysh than Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was, okay? Which is a huge, I mean, just if you hear that for a moment, like things were, you have to understand, Uthman radiallahu anhu was the type that he's coming after Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Umar was very strict, and Uthman's personality was that more lenient and nice guy kind of mentality. And so people loved him, and people loved him even more. So in this first 6 years, he was loved, and he was people knew him, and because he was lenient and generous towards them, and he always made sure the political affairs, those who were in charge above them, were exercising justice and taqwa and not abusing their power and rights. Then Imam al-Zuhri says, then the fitna began after that. Muslim historians call the events that happened in the second half of Uthman's Khilafah, which was from 30 to 35 Hijri, the fitna, which ended in finally the martyrdom of Uthman radiallahu anhu. And it was, I'll tell you a little bit, just to give you the quick summary of what the fitna was. Long story short, it was all about just power and greed and rebel groups that emerged within the empire that accused Uthman radiallahu anhu of all things to give favoritism toward his family and give positions to the Umayyad clan. You have to understand that totally contradicts the messaging Uthman radiallahu anhu was giving for such a long time. These rebel groups, again, colluded with one of the Jewish allies, head tribe leader, Abdullah bin Sabah, and he was a munafiq. And also there was these spies and agents within the empire that continued to spread rumors and propaganda that Uthman radiallahu anhu was somehow collecting wealth, like, that for himself, or he kept it, he gave it to his family, his close family and relatives. He would put people in charge, even though there was one incident where Uthman radiallahu anhu removed one of his own family from a position, but they ignored that. And these rebel groups were emerging, and they were starting to even they staged rebellions, like armed rebellions against the state themselves. And the close consultants of Uthman radiallahu anhu who warned him about that, told him that you can take action, you can raise arms against them. Uthman radiallahu anhu was the one who refused to take arms against them, and he was the one who, he has a quote actually. He says the following. He says, during these days of fitna, he radiallahu anhu said that I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgiveness for whatever I've done wrong, and I've already forgiven if I have been wronged by them. And that was his position, subhanAllah. And he would navigate these rebel groups, and eventually they would do things like block water from himself, from his family, and they would again stage rebellions, and they were creating these uprisings. And the Sahaba, like the close Sahaba, Ali ibn Abi Talib anhu, and the governors that were close to Uthman radiallahu anhu, they would try to appease and bring down these rebellions and take care and listen to what the concerns of the people were, if they were actually valid concerns. But eventually, these rebel groups gained the upper hand in certain positioning, and of course collusion that gave secrets away of how to penetrate into to the very Khilafah and into the quarters of the Khalifa Umar, of Uthman radiallahu anhu himself, and eventually assassinate him. And you have to understand there was a very, very interesting moment, because what ended up happening was these assassins that went and killed Uthman radiallahu anhu, even though, to the point, I mean, we're now looking at a point in history where Uthman radiallahu anhu had achieved so much. He had expanded the empire further. He was the first one to actually command and defeat some and have some major battles against the Persians and Romans. He even was the first to command the naval ships in sea and institute them and have warfare and naval warfare that was new to the Muslims, to the empire of Islam. And he was the one that always looked out for the poor. He was always, throughout his time before Khalifa, and he always was the one that would look to take care of the concerns of the people. He was the one that would keep the governors in check, the tax collectors in check. And he was the one that would not allow even his own family to take position if they did something wrong. Like when he removed one of his own brothers out of a governor position because he was spotted drinking alcohol. Despite all of that, the assassins, when they killed Uthman radiallahu anhu, they went to his house and they looked, subhanAllah, they looked for the money, right? The money that apparently Uthman radiallahu anhu was keeping in his secret, top secret cupboard where he kept for his family. And it was said that when they went there, they went to this little secret cupboard where supposedly that money that he was falsely accused of keeping for his close relatives. And they opened it, they found a box, In that box, there was a piece of paper, and it said the following: "This is Uthman radiallahu anhu. This is Uthman's testimony before Allah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu bears witness that there is no true ilah except Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger. Jannah is true and Jahannam is true, and Allah will resurrect everyone Allah will raise everyone on the day of judgment, for Allah will never break his promise. He, Uthman, lives by that, dies with that, and comes back to life believing in that." This is what the assassins found. They didn't find any money in his cupboard secretly stashed away for his family or anything like that. This is the message he found, and before he was killed, and once he was killed, he was buried afterwards. And even though it was said that one of his wives tried to stop that assassination, she was also injured, had her fingers broken, and eventually the burial took place, and Uthman radiallahu anhu was given a burial that was given rightly due to the shaheed, as a shaheed level. And that was the huge honor, as mentioned in the chat also, that Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu was. So this is who he was, and I hope that inshallah, we all took some lessons and some inspiration from the entire life of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Obviously, I definitely did not do justice. I did not cover even maybe 10% of who he was. I skipped out quite a lot of details of his rule, and there was many things we could spend. And to be honest with you, a session of 2 hours is not at all just to give to Uthman radiallahu anhu. I promise you, as Allah is my witness, we need a full course on Uthman radiallahu anhu. We need to study and understand his entire demeanor and personality, and we need to really look at the mindset he has as one of the biggest carriers of the dawah for Islam, always looking out for his ummah, always living and dying and talking and breathing with the Quran, always walking the walk with the Quran, always speaking the Quran, always putting the affairs of people above him, always warning people of the advice of the Prophet when they were slipping, warning them about the temptations of the dunya, when times of economic prosperity would come, always easing and trying to calm down the tensions of rebel groups and political uprisings, always funding the da'wah, always looking out for the state, always giving whatever he had from his own finances to support the expansion of the masjids, from the armies to the state, Baitul Mal, the treasury, to everything in between. SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. May Allah be pleased with them, obviously. And this was the life of Uthman radiallahu anhu. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him Jannah. Ameen. So with that, I'll end and pass it over back to Brother Azwan. Inshallah, this is obviously part of our Khulafah series. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. And of course, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to learn from his life and continue to study his life, and then actually one day develop an actual course that is dedicated to studying even more detail of Uthman radiallahu anhu. آمين رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك and والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. That was really wonderful. I mean, yes, the letter that you just explained it really make us wonder, how do we live our life and how did they live their lives? Everything that they did from the start to the end was for Allah, and that is it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to follow such wonderful ways of life, the wonderful teachings of life. And this series, this 4 Caliph series, has been wonderful. Jazakallah khair for giving such a good, descriptive, but within time conversation, a narration of the overall situation about Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu.
Brother Azwan, no problem.
Jazakallah khair. With that being said, this was our 3rd episode of the 4 Caliph series. We will also be having the 4th episode. That will be the last one. Same day the next week, same time, about Ali radiallahu anhu. And with that being said, I would also like to talk about the event that we are going to have tomorrow. So many of you might not have seen this before. So this is about the event that's going to happen tomorrow. As it's said in the Quran at the very start, that this is the book. There is no doubt about it. A guide for those mindful of Allah, who believe in the unseen, establish prayer and donate from what we have provided for them. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 2-3. Now, believing in the unseen is an essential quality of the pious believers. But how much can we actually uncover about the hidden world from our Islamic texts? Join Sister Leina Imad hosting Sheikh Abdul Rahim Green in our final Ramadan talk entitled The Unseen World Beyond the Physical Realm, happening on Sunday, tomorrow, April 24th from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Canadian time. And if you're in UK, it will be 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Jazakallah khair for attending this wonderful seminar, this wonderful talk. May Allah make it easy for us to follow the teachings of the great people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. The great caliphs, our prophet. Let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to follow their teachings when it's easy and when it's hard, because at the end of the day, it's the reward that we want, not in this world, but in the hereafter. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not give all the reward in this world. May Allah give the reward for us in the akhirah, because that is what we are striving for. With that being said, it's almost time, the Ramadan is ending up. Let us make the most out of this Ramadan, and let us be a Muslim that we can be proud of, so that at the end of the day, when we are in front of him, we can say, Ya Allah, we have tried the best we can, and please forgive all our sins. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.